everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Danielle Parker from the Science House of NC State University, and I'm here with Ben Owens from Open Way Learning. He's one of the facilitators of the RISE program, and we're here to just talk a little bit about RISE and what RISE is, and Ben's going to give us a little bit more information with a little Q&A. So are you ready for your first question?
Absolutely. Take it away, good.
Awesome. Well, as schools are working towards becoming more innovative, what makes RISE different from traditional professional development?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because we really try to emphasize that this is not your typical PD, that where you go sit and do the activities and then you go back and whatever information you learn kind of just sits and collects dust. This is embracing the idea that we learn best, our students learn best about learning by doing, experiential learning. So we try to model that in every workshop that we do. So it is highly customized. So we start with a needs assessment of each school that we partner with. We try to understand where they are on their respective STEM or innovation journey, as it were. And by the way, just for a disclaimer, when I say STEM, I'm talking about strategies that engage minds, not the traditional science, technology, engineering, math, awesome. Which I think I can say as an engineer with a little bit of credibility. So,
absolutely.
And so it's this idea of, if we want to embrace this model of strategies that engage minds, of experiential learning, of hands-on, minds-on learning, that we have to really identify what are the strengths of our cooperating schools, and then what are their areas of need. And what we then do is we craft the learning experiences in a way that makes sure that we amplify those best practices, those assets that each school has. We sort of find the diamonds in the rough, as it were, but we also truly are identifying what are the barriers that are limiting innovation and have the hard conversations. And the cool thing, additionally, is that it is a cohort model. So schools are participating. Yes, they're focused on their individual needs, but they're also periodically throughout the program sharing best practices with one another, giving each other candid feedback so that they can all improve collectively as well as individually.
Awesome. Well, that kind of brings me to my next question. Especially when you said STEM being, we oftentimes think of it as science, technology, engineering, and math, and really it's strategies that engage minds. And that as schools are considering implementing things like STEM and PBL and design thinking, but often when they try to do that, they end up just being sort of short-lived. So how does RISE approach those topics differently, instead of them just kind of becoming a buzzword or a fad that transitions out of the school and doesn't be sustainable?
Another great question. So yes, and I have seen it, and I think folks listening to this conversation will also have experienced that these things like STEM, like personalized learning, like PBL, design thinking, will often become buzzwords or edu fads where, oh, this is the next sexy thing, let's do that for a period of time. But it is not done with fidelity, and it's not sustained over the long term. And I think the cause of that, if you really analyze it, is because the cultural elements, which are the systems and the people and the relationships, are not part of that initial conversation. So that's what RISE does differently, is we say, yes, we're going to focus on high quality STEM instruction, high quality project-based learning, using the design process, but we're going to attend to the cultural elements, which is, are things like your mission and vision. Is your mission and vision living, or is it something that's just sort of collecting dust on the conference room wall somewhere? Are you embracing this idea of collective leadership or collective autonomy, where the voices of your students, the voices of your teachers, those matter? That people feel like throughout your learning community, they have agency over their growth path. They have agency over decisions that are made. And not that necessarily every idea gets implemented, but at least every idea gets heard. I think that's certainly a cultural element to really allow the learning community to build trust, relationships, transparency. The third thing we look for and emphasize is this culture of collaboration. That's again why we're a cohort model, because we want to make sure, yes, you're collaborating, you're building those structures within the schools, but you're also collaborating across the networks that we have. And then finally, this idea that you're being vulnerable, that you're putting your work out there in the public, you're sharing it beyond the walls of your school. So that's a point of emphasis also. And so we think that when we do that, and the educators who go through this, and I think we have evidence from this from the years we've been doing it, that they see, wow, this is different than the normal sit and get or normal, very focused, insulated type of PD, that this is collaborative. This is all about sharing one's experiences and being vulnerable. And through that process, continuing to improve and get better in a more meaningful way that then allows us to leverage that culture so that STEM is implemented and sustained over a long term. PBL is implemented and sustained over the long term, et cetera, et cetera.
I love that. That's great. I especially love the collaboration piece, not just within the school, but across schools as well. There's so many times I've been into schools, and it's so easy to just become isolated in your own classroom, and you don't even collaborate with the teachers that are at your school. So to be able to collaborate with the teachers at your school plus collaborate with other schools is just amazing, and that's awesome. That doesn't happen very often these days. So my next question is definitely a current event. Why is this type of program maybe essential, especially right now for schools as we emerge from the pandemic?
Yes, very much right now. So one, I would say it goes back to what we were just talking about, is collaboration. I think what we have learned from the pandemic, when sort of the curtain was pulled back and we saw an education system that wasn't what we perhaps really thought it was or wanted it to be, is that because there was no rule book on how to do this, how to pivot from, face-to-face in-building learning to a remote environment in a very short amount of time, a lot of teachers learned how to be very adaptive, learned how to find the resources that they need and do whatever it takes to reach kids and engage with kids. So I think we have an inherent value of collaboration and network that happened from this pandemic. That may be one of the silver linings, if there are just a handful of you out there, of this idea that we're not on our own. We're not in individual isolated classrooms anymore. We do have the ability through things like Zoom or other platforms to connect with people all over the planet. And I think that's one of the things that I'm really excited about, is that level of collaboration has been enhanced. And so what RISE does is say at the very beginning that is a minimum essential ingredient for high quality teaching and learning at your school and across an entire ecosystem. That when we do that, we are able to accelerate the pace of change that is needed for our students. The second thing gets back to this idea, which I hate the term learning loss. And unfortunately, what I see many schools do is say, well, we're going to address that by bringing kids in the summer and we're going to put them in front of screens or worksheets or whatever so they can, quote, get caught up. So it's going back to the same types of methods that we know don't really work, that aren't really effective other than for a small minority of students. And yet we're going back to the well again. So what this program is all about is to suggest that there's a better way, that we can do hands-on, experiential, project-based, problem-based strategies that engage minds approach to high quality teaching and learning. But it is different than what many of us experienced in our own education background. So we've got to be conscious that it's not just something that you can flip the switch. It does take focusing on those cultural elements. So I think building the culture of collaboration, which is a key emphasis, and responding to this I would say, this inherent need now to say we've got to change what high quality teaching and learning looks like across the entire state. And the RISE program is positioned to help teachers do that.
Awesome. I love that. Well, Ben, what are some examples of the work that has happened in the past that helps schools kind of grow into this learning community?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, the kind of the emphasis that we do is mission and vision. So one example is Glenwood Elementary School in Chapel Hill has been a participant in RISE for several years. And so they actually took very seriously this idea of their mission and vision. So they went back and involved members of the community to really evaluate what is our current mission and vision? Does it make sense? Is it living, or is it just this idea that is just hanging on the walls somewhere? Do members of our community know it? Do our students know it? Do our teachers know it? And so they really took seriously that approach. And in that process, they are better able now to understand who they are. What is their why? What is their unique niche in the district and in North Carolina? Because right now we realize that you can't just assume that, oh, we're the school in the neighborhood and everybody's going to automatically come to us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that train left the station a long time ago. So schools have got to really identify what is their why, what is their mission and vision, and then articulate that. So that's one example. The other schools that we work with have recognized that their PLC structure was not as strong as it needed to be, that they weren't collaborating the way that they should. So they've worked on protocols and norms so that they can improve the overall mission and vision. They've identified how can they break down the walls of the school and actually work with members of their local community so that kids are actually making a difference right now in their communities, working on community facing projects. Now, that's a little bit, or was a little bit harder to do during the pandemic, but we have been able to really support and help schools along the way in that process. And then I'll go back to that idea of just having other thought partners. So, you know, the Global Scholars Academy in Durham now has a thought partner in Glenwood in Chapel Hill that they can immediately collaborate with because they've developed deep relationships through this program. And then the other schools in the network are other examples that can continue to do that, especially in an online environment where they can just reach out to one another. So collectively, we can better solve problems. So those are some of the intrinsic benefits that speak to how you can build that culture, in addition to also knowing how to do high quality projects or knowing how to do STEM lessons in a more meaningful way, et cetera.
Excellent. And that, as you were talking, it kind of made me think about how what I have been able to observe through RISE is really the ability of schools and teachers and administration to be able to reflect on internally their structure and what's working and what's not working. And RISE sort of gives them a space to do that, which again is just one of those things that I think through the year goes by the wayside because
Yep.
you know things slip off your plate. And so
Yeah.
I love that RISE sort of gives the space for schools to be able, and the platform and the support for schools to be able to reflect on the school as an entity and what is working and what is not working, which is awesome.
Yeah, and that thanks for bringing that up. I'm glad you have noticed that, because that has been an intentional, although we probably don't do as good of a job of highlighting that aspect of, but it's very intentional because a lot of what RISE is doing is it's not like it's new. I mean, this is stuff that John Dewey has been talking about, or Vygotsky or Paget or whatever, this constructivist type of approach to learning. We just allow a lot of times the bureaucratic minutia to get in the way of what we know is high quality teaching and learning environments. But reflection is a key piece, and that's something that the participants who go through the PD that we do and things like that know that early and often we reflect. And actually Dewey, I think, said it best. I'll probably best mess up this quote, but we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So that's a key element of the process. And we try to emphasize that don't let the tyranny of the urgent move reflection to the back burner, because you'll do so at your own detriment.
I love it. That's great. Awesome. Couple more questions. What would you tell educators, administrators who are considering being a part of next year's RISE cohort? Is there anything that you would just want to say to them if they're thinking about it, but they're not really sure? And I apologize, my dogs are in the back, but hopefully they're not too big of a distraction.
Bring it all. Yeah. I mean, what I would tell educators who are kind of on the fence or maybe looking at this, and I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, so please go to the website and look at the cost and things like that. But it is a very competitive investment, because what you are getting is much more than just paying for the PD hours that you're going to get. So just on just balance sheet and looking at it and saying, all right, the amount of PD hours that I would get based on that level of investment is well worth it and well competitive in today's market. But then all of these intrinsic benefits that we're getting in addition.
Sorry.
Everybody just wants some attention, right? That's okay. But all the other intrinsic benefits that I mentioned before, like really this time where you can look at your school's culture, where you can really dig deep into the systems, build those relationships, build that collaboration. That's not just going to happen in any PD, and that is why we put that at the forefront for this type of professional learning. So yeah, so the other, okay.
Pause for just 1 second.
No problem.
Hey, come on, out and out. Go. I'm sorry, I should have closed my door.
Oh, no problem.
Okay.
So ask that question, just an abbreviated version of that, because I'm going to carry it outside of the cost area into another area.
Okay. So what would you tell educators or administrators who might be considering being a part of next year's RISE cohort?
Mm-hmm. So one other thing that I would, in addition to what I see as a very worthwhile investment, is this idea of this allows you to take a step back and look at who you are in a much deeper fashion. Because if we try to do that internally, although it is certainly possible, it's not as likely to happen. And I think we just know that by, you get tied up in all the things that are constantly nagging at you, that you don't get that chance to really step back and have an externally facilitated conversation about the really important things, again, related to your systems, your people, those relationships, all of those cultural elements typically don't get talked about enough. And providing the space and time for us to do that, especially in a collaborative environment, a safe environment, and at the same time learning a lot of really great protocols and tools and things that all help us get to be better educators, is really well worth it. And so we have been very intentional and rely heavily on the feedback that we constantly get, because Michelle and I, to do this as former educators who relied heavily on formative feedback and making those micro adjustments in our classrooms. That's the same approach that we take with this program as well. Is we don't know, a month in advance. We have a general idea where we're headed, but we use that input from others and listening to what our customers are saying, listening to what our users are saying, using the design process to help craft each session in a very customized way.
I love that. And I can, again, from drawing from my experiences with Rise over the last year and a half, can attest to that as well. I've seen you guys turn on a dime when you need to, which is amazing, and just really reflective of what the teachers and the school needs at that particular moment in time, which is wonderful.
Yep.
Last question. Can you give us an idea of what the year of professional development might look like in terms of the teachers? You know, what should they be on the lookout for? What should they expect? And then, you know, why should schools consider doing this program? Just a
Okay.
general last thought.
Sure. So each participating school will have a cohort of usually 4 to 6 people. We insist that at least one person on the team be an administrator, assistant principal, whatever, and then the rest teachers from across the spectrum. We do heavy at first with some face-to-face. You know, all things COVID is hopefully moving past us, and with vaccinations and all the other stuff, we're in a position where we can go back to doing that, because it's obviously much more effective to do so, we feel, than multiple days on Zoom. But so the building the relationships early, so it's front end loaded in that respect, not only with the relationships, but then modeling what does the design process look like. So you would see elements of the design process within each session and throughout the year. You will see elements of high quality project-based learning within each session and throughout the year. You're going to see elements of us customizing and using, we have what's called a maturity model. So we're using a standard to say, all right, this is where we want to help students, or excuse me, each school aspire to, but then we give them a buffet of options about how they can do that. So the pathway is going to look differently, and then check in throughout the year. So heavy face-to-face, like 3 days ish, typically in Raleigh at the Science House at the beginning of the year. And then throughout the year, they would be milestone meetings where we would come back together, check in. How are we doing? What additional supports are needed? How do we share ideas with one another, craft the next, and then throughout the year. So by the end of the year, we would then do a site visit of each, so that Michelle and I have a chance to come in and see all the great work that's been happening. Now, that doesn't preclude the fact that we would do one-on-one coaching, either face-to-face or virtually throughout the year as well, which is another key part of the program, as well as visiting other schools that aren't necessarily in the RISE cohort, but have achieved a certain level of expertise with regard to STEM or PBL or competency-based learning, or whatever. So we've got that network of innovative schools that we also visit and collaborate with also. So those are the examples of kind of how it's structured, but then within that, there's a lot of customization as well. And then back to your final question about why we should be doing this. Hopefully, if you're listening to this, you realize that we've got to change how we do teaching and learning in this country, that the traditional compliance and control and one size fits all abstract siloed learning that was designed for a different time and different space is not working for our kids, particularly our kids who have historically been furthest from opportunity. So we suggest, Michelle and I strongly, and Danielle, and your involvement in the program, I think you are absolutely with this as well as all the other folks that we work with, is there is a better way. It's not necessarily an easier way. It takes hard work, but teaching is hard work. This education business is hard work. And the value is when we get students actually making a difference today, whether they're in kindergarten or getting ready to graduate, but they're making a difference because of the things that they're doing, then we have equipped them with the skills and that they need to thrive in today's rapidly changing world. I mean, we're in the 4th industrial revolution now, and we're still operating in a school system that in many cases looks a lot like what it did during the first and second industrial revolution. And to me, that's unacceptable. And so if you're at a school that believes that at all, then I would encourage you to at least go to the website, look at what we're offering. And it may not be for you, but if it is, give us a call. Let us chat, and we will be happy to answer any questions.